very much. Please, can we put our hands together for that? Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, the Vice Chancellor, the Dean of Law, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Administration, the Registrar, the Dean of Law, professors here present, learned senior advocates, distinguished students, and colleagues. Welcome to the second distinguished lecture series of the Faculty of Law, Baze University. The series is an initiative of the Faculty of Law, Baze University, that provides a platform for distinguished practitioners in different fields to interact with the university community. This is an example of one of those events. We've had similar events in the past, and we're privileged today to have.
Thank you for joining us on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA, as we bring to you one in the series of Baze University Distinguished Lectures organized by the Faculty of Law of the university. I am Adebola Brookslyn Sunday. The guest speaker, Amina Mohammed, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations and the Chairperson of the UN Sustainable Development Group, will be speaking on the use of ceasefire agreements in avoiding escalation of armed conflicts.
Law teacher at the Faculty of Law, Baze University. I think I deserve a round of applause. Thank you very much for that. Going straight into our discussion today, this man is a gentleman by excellence. He is an administrator. He is a politician. He is a law teacher. We share a lot of similarities, and I will just mention two. Because of fear, I will not mention the third one. One is a lawyer. I'm privileged to also be a lawyer. He's a law teacher. I'm also a law teacher. He is from my state, and he's from Kwara State. I'm from Kwara State. That I always try to say, maybe I will be covered by this event today because we share similar heights. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I have the singular privilege to make welcome the Dean of Law, Associate Professor Ali Ahmad, for his welcome remark. Thank you very much.
Our distinguished guest, Her Excellency Mrs. Amina J. Mohammed, the Vice Chancellor, Professor Tahir Mamman, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, the Deputy Vice Chancellors, the Registrar, Deans, Directors, my colleagues, lecturers from other faculties, and my respected colleagues, students of this great Center of Learning, Baze University. I indeed welcome all of you to this hall. Finally, the hour has arrived. We have been waiting for. We have worked assiduously, and people have assisted us, and we are very grateful to the lecturer. As Mr. Ashonibare said, this is one of the series of the faculty's distinguished lecture series for this year. The guest speaker, we all know her. She's one of the most qualified, I would say, Nigerians on earth to speak to the topic. She was involved in the murky politics of Nigeria, and she came out snow white. She has been involved in the treachery of international politics. Instead of sinking, she is towering high. So we believe at the end of the session, we will all have benefited from this lecture. And coming to the audience, we know Baze University, the students are knowledge-seeking, they are inspired, They are searching for wisdom, and it will be very difficult, Your Excellency, to find a better audience than this audience that you are having this afternoon. Without much ado, I have the singular privilege to welcome you to Baze, welcome all of us for this important lecture, and I urge us to listen so that at the end, we will all take the benefit. You are all welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please let's give him a round of applause. He has also mandated me to look at the law students that are not clapping for him. I don't know what will happen after now. So you have to give him another round of applause. Thank you very much. Going straight into our program again, when you see him, you can easily notice him. You know what lawyers call recipsa loquitur. When you see him coming, you know he's the one coming. He is an administrator. As a lawyer, he grew to the rank of Learned Senior Advocate of Nigeria. As a law teacher, he became the Director General of the largest law school in Africa. As also a law teacher, he rose to the rank of Professor of Law. Some people call him the teachers of teachers. I call him the grandfather of teachers. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let's make welcome Professor Tahir Mama, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, OON, as he comes to give us his remark.
Thank you, Dio. At least I have no reason to hesitate. You will hold your salary for the rest of the month. For the accolades. In the university system, we are not used to this kind of thing because lecturers and students are just two sides of the same coin. So we speak the same language. Your Excellency, our guest this afternoon, Mrs. Amina Mohammed, other distinguished guests who are here. I am here to simply say thank you, welcome, and thank you for finding time to grace or to be at this event. But before I complete my appreciation, I want to thank the Dean and the Faculty of Law for putting together this event under the auspices of the Guest Faculty of Law series. It's the kind of thing that we want to see in the university. It is the kind of thing which makes the universities different from other places, where you have a platform, a forum for sharing of ideas with the high and the mighty. So we are very happy that this one is coming up this afternoon. And I was quipping to her that I wish this was actually a convocation lecture, because that's what she has standing measures up to. It's not an easy thing to have a Deputy Secretary General in your midst. But when she's a Nigerian, she's one of you, you can take that advantage. That's what we have done. Otherwise, it's not an easy thing at all to have this, her personality, because she's enormously busy with all the protocol around her. But knowing her and all the information about her, she's a very simple person, easygoing, interested in ideas, which universities stand for. And of course, somehow, in the short time we just visited here, she only knew this university when it was at idea stage. So you can imagine her surprise coming in here now and see what is in this place. And this is all to the credit of the founder, Senator Datti Baba Ahmed, who unfortunately is not here, but he apologizes, he's abroad, but he deeply appreciates this event. When he saw the notice this morning, he was extremely elated, and in fact worried about he's not here. But of course we're here, the event can't wait, so we really deeply appreciate. And then looking at the theme, you know, it can't be anything better because of where we are in the world of today. There's too much crisis all over the place. And at the end of the day, everything still comes back to, you know, to the table. People fight, and then they still have to come back to the table. In between, countries broker some form of ceasefire. Okay, hold your fire, let's see if we can solve this problem. So she decided to pick on this, and you know, you can't have anything better. So, Your Excellency, as I said at the beginning, we are here to train the young ones, but you'll be surprised. Faculty of Law in particular in Baze University is not just a place for training the young ones. We have a lot of senior ones. Members of the National Assembly, former and serving ministers, heads of agencies, they are all here as students. And so we rub minds with them. Their experiences are also very, very helpful and very useful. So the lecture is also very good for the young and the adults. And so without turning myself into a mini lecturer, my job is to simply welcome, thank you, and welcome, and thank everybody who have been able to find time to be here. So let's sit down and enjoy. Thank you, and God bless.
Please, let's keep clapping. Let's keep clapping. Thank you very much. Before we go into reading of our citation, I think it's very important to recognize some very distinguished personalities here, but I promise we won't waste much time in doing that. We want to recognize the presence of the Deputy Vice Chancellor Administration, Mr. David.
On March 23rd last year, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres issued an urgent appeal for a global ceasefire in all countries of the world. He said, and I quote, "Now is the time for a collective new push for peace and reconciliation," end of quote. And his deputy, Amina, Mohammed, is here to speak on the ceasefire agreement in avoiding escalation of armed conflicts.
This time around, so I might not have to. Okay, good. Good. So, thank you for being our student. We also recognize Professor Sani Adams, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. We recognize the presence of Dr. Shuara, Director of Strategy and Special Duties. I just realized that I did not recognize the boss, and you know what will happen to my salary? Please, we also recognize the presence of our boss, Mr. Over. Thank you, Dalhatu. Thank you very much. I think as my distinguished colleagues, please let's put our hands together for distinguished colleagues of Faculty of Law and also the university. We also recognize the presence of the HOD, Mass Communication. Please let's put our hands together for him. Okay, at this point, we're just going to cut this short. As the name keeps coming in, we're going to recognize them. Please permit me, forgive me if I don't mention any name. We're going to invite Mrs. Stella Peter Inyang as she comes to read the citation of our guest speaker.
It is such a privilege for me to stand here and talk about a lady that I've admired for a very, very long time. A distinguished lady, a technocrat by excellence. She is the guest speaker today on this auspicious occasion. Mrs. Amina Jane Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. Thank you. The Chair of the United Nations Sustainable Development Group. When I think the VC said, oh, she's a humble lady, I knew she was, because this is all they gave me to talk about. And I know if I had to stand here to talk about her, it would be loads and loads of papers like this. But they kept it very brief. Mrs. Amina Mohammed, Her Excellency, prior to her appointment, served as a Minister of Environment of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, where she steered, the environmental issues, her efforts on climate action and efforts of to protect the natural environment was key. We all know, and I think we must have read the news a lot of times. There was a name they called her, if anybody in the audience can remember, Madam Environment. She did everything that she could to ensure that the Ogoni region was, environmental friendly. Sorry? Can you? Esther of Ogoni, seated right here. Okay? So this lady has shattered the ceiling for all of us, especially women. Now, as a woman, you know that there is nothing stopping you from achieving your goals if you have integrity and combine it with hard work. Her Excellency, Madam Mohammed, first joined the United Nations in 2012 as a special advisor to former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, with the responsibility of the post-2015 development planning. She led the process that resulted in global agreement around the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the creation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Madam, we've looked at all the goals, and we key into the goal of education and peace. Madam has been working round the clock to ensure that she has her focus on education. That is why Her Excellency began her career workshop on the design of schools and clinics in Nigeria. She served as an advocate focused on increased access to education and other social services before moving into the public sector, where she rose to the position of advisor to four successive presidents, on poverty, public sector reform, and sustainable development. Madam has left her footprints on the sands of this country. She has done a lot to develop humanity, and now has moved on to the United Nations. Though she's there, her focus is still on Nigeria. I am proud of her as a Nigerian and more as a woman. Her Excellency, Amina Mohammed, has been conferred with several honorary doctorate degrees, which is why I say these 4 paragraphs is nothing. And has served as an adjunct professor, lecturing on international development, the recipient of several awards. She has received several awards for her job. A lady, a woman. Ms. Mohammed has served on numerous international advisory boards and panels, and she's a mother of 6 children. And hold on, 6 children and 2 grandchildren. Madam, we are so proud of you. She says another grandchild on the way. Thank you so much for coming to our community, madam. Without much ado, I would say, please make welcome, upstanding, to Her Excellency, Madam Amina Jane Mohammed.
Thank you so much. Perhaps the round of applause ought to go to all the students here because they have to now suffer my lecture. But thank you, Dean, and thank you all, the staff of this really great university. And it was right, the last time I saw it is when Senator Datti had the idea, and we all wondered what would become of it. And so really congratulations. And he was on the phone a few minutes ago asking me, how can I come to the university when he's not here? So I'm really delighted to join this lecture series, but let me give the blame to a former colleague. You're going to know that as you keep networks, as you keep your colleagues here, your friends here, you never let them go because they are part of who you are, your life journey. And so when it comes along and they ask you to do something, you usually do it. In this particular case, I wasn't sure what it was going to lead to, so I didn't take much time to say to my former colleague, yes, of course, I'll come and talk to 6 students. And then suddenly, the dean made it many more. So, Honorable Minister of Transport, right, Honorable Rotimi Amici, thank you. And it is, it's important because the one thing that I don't refuse, it doesn't matter where it is when young people say they want to speak to me. Absolutely, because I really had the opportunity of serving, and I still am, and I hope I do so until the end of my days. But it is, as a young person, I probably did a lot more noise than the noise that I hear around today. So I'm always proud of you, because you have the energy, you have the vision, it's your future, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So delighted to join this lecture. Most especially for the women. The women in this crowd here today, I mean, you're just a representation of privileged people who come for an education, and there's probably maybe even 50% of you in this audience. This is quite incredible. It's not like that in many, many places. But today I claim, you know, number 2 civil servant, public servant in the world, and I do that because it means that any one of you can be number 1. Any one of you can be number 1. So I've not been able to hold many in-person meetings over the last year, and so it's really good to be with you today. I think the one surprise that I got in the audience was Dr. Jamila Suara, who really started and helped me learn about education in this country. And she really should stand up and be counted because amazing, amazing woman. One of the very few women who held her own as a director in the Federal Ministry of Education, and you know, you won't know that until you pass through the Federal Ministry of Education. But let me go back to just over 15 months ago. The date was the 23rd of March, 2020, and the world was facing one of the greatest tests of time. I was just traveling back from Papua New Guinea, where I went to celebrate with women, Women's Day, and it really was, for us, a big challenge. A global crisis which needed a global response. That's what really befell us. The COVID-19 pandemic, tiny virus that brought the world to a standstill. Lockdown, you'd have thought you were watching a movie if you didn't know better. It started with a health pandemic in which we lost many, many people. But perhaps the more serious of the effects was that the prescription we gave for the health pandemic ended up giving us impacts, side effects in the socioeconomic sphere that will go on for years to come. So it was not just a health one, it was a socioeconomic disaster as well. And that is affecting billions of people. The UN Secretary General at that time, everyone had closed down, including us. In fact, it was just him and I and those who kept the building going, 38 stories of it, that stayed from that date all the way through to today. So it's good to see people coming back in the building. But there was a time there was just 6 or 7 of us in our building that held more than 6,000. That's what it did. And at that time, it felt like the whole world had gone to sleep. And so his voice had to be loud. And one of the first things that he did was realizing that the crisis was actually risking reversing many of the gains on the peace agenda, on the development agenda, on the human rights agenda, and that this was going to make a difference to the most vulnerable of people. And so what he decided to do was really to recognize that, that the COVID-19 pandemic would reverse the gains, and that we would need to have our voice loud and clear. In many cases, the lack of adequate health systems and governance structures, combined with very poor basic service in countries already facing humanitarian crisis, would seriously be constrained at that time. We had women and children in very fragile settings that were particularly likely to face obstacles that were accessing health care, livelihoods, education, and other critical support. Their need for protection in many humanitarian crises, protection related to domestic and gender violence. Gender-based violence has increased 300% across the world in the last year and a half. And then we also looked at what really the imposition of much needed social distancing measures were causing, and of course the lockdown. In this context, we needed to act quickly and decisively. And so on March the 23rd, the Secretary General launched an appeal for a global ceasefire to help create conditions for the delivery of aid and to open up space for diplomacy. What he saw then was a silver lining in the cloud of COVID. That was a moment that perhaps we could talk to leaders, that we could talk to warring factions, that people would realize that peace really was the way for sustainable development, for prosperity, and really that the war was not the way to go. This came with his call. We were lucky enough that a few months later, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 2532, expressing support for the Secretary General's call. And that, you might ask, well, is that just not a normal thing that the Security Council would do? After all, that is why we set up the United Nations in 1945. But in a polarized world, where in fact the center is not holding, the 5 countries that owe a responsibility to keep peace in the world are actually not holding, it was a very big call, and the response from those 5 countries was incredibly important. So the appeal to was positive. Widespread support after that. Once the P5 speak, people tend to lean in that direction. So we did get world leaders and governments, as well as regional partners, civil society, and religious leaders leaning towards peace and the ceasefire. Conflict parties, from Colombia to the Philippines, parts of the Middle East, took steps to stop fighting by announcing unilateral ceasefires. In Africa, the chairperson of the African Union, Mohammed Faki, echoed the Secretary General's call on the 27th of March, and many African governments called for national unity, including the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Togo, all who had faced crisis at one time or another, conflict. Côte d'Ivoire and Niger joined them, endorsing the global ceasefire appeal, and reiterated their commitment to working jointly with the international community on implementation. In Sudan, a unilateral cessation of hostilities was announced by the government, and most of the armed movements, except one. In South Sudan, the Secretary General's call appeal bolstered efforts to uphold existing arrangements on cessation of hostilities that were agreed by warring parties. This created minimum conditions for the formation of the revitalized Transitional Government of National Unity on the 22nd of February. In Cameroon, the Southern Cameroonian Defense Forces, an armed wing of the African People's Liberation Movement, also announced a temporary ceasefire on the 25th following the appeal. So you could see that there was movement, there was engagement, there was a want to actually put down weapons and face peace. But dear colleagues and students, while the initial response to the Secretary General's appeal was positive and shows that calls for ceasefires can be effective, today we need to dig deeper and focus on what must be done to avoid the escalation of conflicts, including armed conflicts. How can we collectively act to ensure that peace and prosperity is for all? What role can we play individually and collectively as a global community in this effort? And what roles can governments play as we try to face this? Armed conflicts mostly affect civilians, and we know that that is the soft underbelly of our societies. The critical and fragile infrastructure that sustains them. We've seen that in this country when our critical infrastructure was attacked. International humanitarian law, which applies in situations of international and non-international armed conflict. You'll know that that aims to regulate the conduct of the parties to conflict with a view really to upholding the basic principles of humanity. So even in that theater of conflict, that theater of war, we must try to maintain that human dignity, and there must be rules, instruments, and provisions that we have of international humanitarian law that must prevail. These are sometimes very different, depending on the context that we are dealing with, and of late, the type of armed conflict which has changed over the recent years. On the one hand, main instruments that are applicable to international armed conflicts are the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949, to which Nigeria has been a party since 1960, since our independence, an additional protocol in 1977, to which Nigeria has been a party since 1989. So, as we stand today, party to the protocols, we have access to the instruments. And many of the instruments contain provisions that pertain to the protection of the wounded, sick, and shipwrecked, our prisoners of war, civilians, including those who are in occupied territories, Palestine, provisions that regulate the conduct of hostilities, such as the obligation to distinguish civilians from combatants and civilian objects from military objectives. And this is really important given the kind of insurgency that we see today in many countries, particularly across the Sahel. The obligation to refrain from indiscriminate attacks, the obligation to respect proportionality in attack, and the obligation to take constant care to spare civilians and civilian objects in the conduct of military operations. Many of these rules are considered to be as a customary part of international law, and so applicable to all states. On the other hand, the treaty rules applicable to non-international armed conflicts are not extensive and are mainly contained in the Common Article 3 of the Geneva Convention of 1949 and an additional Protocol 2 of 1977. Non-international armed conflicts can best be defined as an armed conflict that takes place between governmental authorities and organized armed groups or between such groups within a state. And such conflicts exist when there is protracted armed violence between them. In addition, while international law provides rules that are specifically applicable to armed conflicts, international human rights law applies at all times, including in situations of armed conflict. Some examples include the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which Nigeria has also been party since 1993, and the optional protocol on the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the involvement of children in armed conflict, one that was signed in May 25, 2000, to which Nigeria has also been a party since 2012. In all conflicts, ceasefire and cessation of hostilities agreements, or even short-term humanitarian pauses, can provide a much-needed reprieve and break the cycle of violence in conflict setting. The United Nations and other multilateral organizations are often asked to play a role of mediator or facilitator in developing and implementing such agreements. And so there, when sometimes people ask, so what has the United Nations done? What I would say is that there is a reality, and there are the aspirations that are either within resolutions and instruments there to help us to close that gap between what is a reality and very dire in many stages, and what is the aspirations of those conventions. Many, many instruments, also platforms that we in the UN have, and one that the Secretary General has been able to use is the convening of a mediators panel, to which we have our former President Obasanjo as one that has joined over 20 leaders who are in civil society, former presidents and prime ministers, and from academia. On many occasions, the UN Security Council has issued ceasefire directives which have helped us to prevent major hostilities. Efforts to seek a sustainable ceasefire agreement or humanitarian pause in an intense conflict can face several challenges, especially during the early stages of fighting when things are incredibly complex. These challenges can range from differing objectives and motivations of the conflict parties and changing conflict dynamics to the direct or indirect influences of regional and international actors. That's when it becomes really quite complex. What starts in a local environment and then suddenly infused our international interests becomes probably some of the most protracted conflicts that we've had in history. Currently, the UN is leading or supporting efforts to achieve or implement ceasefire agreements in a range of conflict contexts: Afghanistan, Libya, South Sudan, Sudan, and Yemen. So even though we had those initial thoughts, those initial ceasefires, in many cases, these have not been able to hold. In the case of Afghanistan, major partner to trying to keep the peace, the United States, on the 4th of July, they leave. Then what happens? You have a country where now our presence, which at the moment is only political, becomes an even more bigger challenge for the country and for the neighbors. So achieving agreement for ceasefire is only one half of the effort. The other half is ensuring that the agreements are implemented in a sustainable manner. This requires that any ceasefire agreement to be technically solid, based on the foundations of strong political will, and most importantly, inclusive in nature, is incredibly important to that endeavor. Ceasefires need to strive to take into account the views, the rights, the needs and concerns of every stakeholder, including, and I would say especially, women, young people, and civil society. Ceasefires often can help achieve relative calm, build trust that has usually been decimated. A comprehensive resolution of conflict, however, can only be achieved if we're addressing the root causes and the political drivers of the conflict. And so, colleagues and students, today, the international peace and security landscape is at a crossroad. It is one where we look to Africa and we want to silence the guns. We said so 10 years ago, and we had to renew it. In fact, there are probably more guns going off, only this time really complex. The traditional warfare that we understand, but the many new types of conflict that we are facing, for which we have, in many cases, no experience, and for which are beyond our borders. They've become much more complex and multifaceted with the proliferation of non-state armed groups and the growing involvement of what we would say are regional and international actors. I'd say also that the climate emergency and the technological disruption have created additional sources of stress, and you might wonder why, but this is all part of the context. And for us, we've seen the climate and security nexus in many places, in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa. These are all places that are facing that security landscape as a complex environment. But also technological disruption. That has been technology for good, platforms that we all use today. Every one of you presses a button and is connected. But people press a button and things go up in the sky and come down on people. People's lives are lost, property is lost, conflict continues, information's exchanged. What type of information? And perhaps a lot more these days of misinformation that really does give root cause to many of the conflicts that we see perpetuated. So these trends have made peacekeeping and conflict resolution much more difficult. So many more gray areas in that area. And so the only real sustainable answer for us is in prevention. We've got the wars, we don't need any more. And since I joined the UN, I've seen West Africa be a small part of it red, and most of it now is redded out from Nigeria all the way across to Senegal. And that, for us, is what we need to prevent. We need to try to stop the existing ones, but frankly, today the big challenge is prevention. And where we have peace, we need to transition in a way that is sustainable to prevent any more crises happening. We believe that prevention, if it's tackled rightly, if we really take the root causes, and as I said, that have to be inclusive, have to be representative of what has disturbed and perhaps torn at the fabric of society, then we can hope to flatten the curve of conflict and create space so that the management tools, conflict management tools that we have, which today are currently overwhelmed, have some opportunity of succeeding. At the heart of this approach is the need to engage early and proactively with a range of actors. There's no one person that can solve it. It is a range, individually, collectively, that come together to do this within the country, within the region. Sub-regional organizations, we see that in West Africa with ECOWAS and the efforts that they made to try to bring some peace to Mali as they come to their transition. But also with civil society, with women's groups, with youth groups, and also to make a significant political investment in peace making and conflict resolution. Nowhere have we seen more evidence than in Africa, where the UN has established a strategic partnership with the African Union and the UN Regional Economic Commissions. The UN is also focused on helping to reinforce national capacities for conflict prevention, with the understanding that prevention is more effective when it is led by national and local actors. And often this does not happen. We've had to deal with prescriptions that come on from up high who don't understand the local environment, don't understand what the fabric itself is facing as it is tested. In this context, the UN put inclusion and the promotion of women's political participation and youth engagement at the center of all our efforts, and efforts that are responsive to specific needs and rights of women and girls. More impact in our missions, more impact in local situations, and in the teams that do this. Throughout the world, we also see a younger, more vibrant and more interconnected generation, increasingly demanding to participate in all parts and aspects of decision-making. I think this is really important for Africa, because if we say that this is about your future, at what point are we actually asking your future to begin? It's already begun, it's already out there. You're the largest cohort in Africa. And so if we're not really thinking about how to involve in an integral way young people in peacemaking, peace building, mediation, prevention, and I'll go through a few of the issues that perhaps one can look at that as you consider the kind of enabling environment, what you need legally, what you need in terms of strong institutions, then I think we will not have that transition that we're looking for from conflict to peace. So genuine inclusion is what we're talking about, meaningful participation, really look at the structural inequalities and discrimination that we see. I often say that women have had a glass ceiling that we've had to shatter, but young people actually have a concrete one. You're still chiseling away to try to get through. And I can say that from the UN, because I know that in the UN, at least in the secretariat that I have responsibility over, the average age of entry into my secretariat is 44 years old. So, and we just extended our what we call retirement by another 5 years. So we're a pretty old organization. And that organization is trying to deal with what is the largest cohort, your vision, your aspirations, the legal environment that you ought to find yourselves in and participating. It makes it said that you're going to get recipes from the past. So today, I think there's a lot of positive and less positive news. We always start with the positive, because the glass is always some full, whether it's quarter full or half full. Then you can talk about what you need to do to fill it. But if you start from where it's empty, you're never going to fill it, because you don't even know where the full part is. It's really important to have that mindset that you're about nation building, you're about fixing what has gone wrong, that you know that it's not going to happen overnight, and it's never about a person, a leader. It's about a whole community. And this is really what is important for us in conflicts across Africa, not just what we find here. So I think that the positive news is that we do have a roadmap. There are many, and as we have here, the most ambitious, educated, digitally savvy generation that we've ever known. I mean, I think we are sort of dinosaurs when it comes to the digital world. But the UN has to try to put some kind of framework in place, because it is not, it's today that we say we have never been so embraced with the capacity to do everything the right way. We have never had so much in the history of the world as we have today to do good, to have prosperity, to move you generations in leaps and bounds. And yet, it's those same instruments that also have a challenge for us. I do believe that some of the less positive news is that we have to address inequalities, inequalities that really are the root causes of conflicts, of poverty. When you take away dignity from a human being and you take away hope, there's nothing left. And those are the things that we have to invest in, because every human being, at least within your nation's walls, has a right to those things, at least their dignity and their hope. Invest in that, and then you have more peaceful societies. Take it away, and you can be sure that you have fodder for conflict over generations. In the United Nations, we talk about the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. That's what I'm known for, from the MDGs to the SDGs. It's not just a set of 17 goals. It's a set of 17 issues that we must invest in. At least 8 of them are the ones where economies need to make sure that people are included in the investments that are made, so that you can build those societies and you can provide for basic rights. There's a few of us here who are the beneficiaries of an education and a health system in the 60s. We're probably on the front row, right? Yeah, something like that. I think we have to appreciate that. It is often frustrating for me in the UN when they're talking to me about that we don't have birth certificates and we don't have basic education. They still have to come and teach us how to do school feeding. It's very frustrating, because in Maiduguri, that's what I got. I had a birth certificate from the town hall in Kaduna. I had a school feeding in Maiduguri. I mean, these are not new. These are things that we had. So what went wrong? And to this audience, I think it's really important that investments in institutions, so that one goal that we have on 16, the rule of law, strong institutions, human rights are really, really important. And when we talk about human rights, because we issued a call for the human rights, everyone sort of thinks it's coming from outside. And I've always said to the National Human Rights Commission here in Nigeria, the Bill of Rights for us is in our Constitution. It's not in Geneva. It's not in Addis Ababa. It's here in Nigeria. It's in our Constitution. We need to start talking about upholding that. If we can uphold that, then perhaps we can benchmark ourselves where we are as it goes to a global standard for what we want to do in terms of our rights. So the goals themselves offer us many opportunities to frame discussions. Have a look at them. I'm sure, maybe, I don't know, how many of you in this room have ever looked at the Sustainable Development Goals? Yeah, terrible. So fail. And if I ask the lecturers how many have actually taught them, then it's probably even a bigger story to tell, right? But it's really important to tell the story of how that was framed. It took 4 years and 193 countries to endorse that. That's a lot of work by diplomats, a lot of work by academicians, a lot of work by scientists that were framing those goals. So they're not just a feel-good, these are the 17 goals. They are a way for you to frame the discussions that you need to have about nation building, about the prevention of conflict, and about transitions to peace and sustaining that peace. Investments in people, investments in the environment, investments in the economy that go beyond GDP as a measure, because well-being has to be included in that, as does education and others. So I think that the 2030 Agenda is one instrument that's worth having. For us now, to scale up the system of preventive action, what's the incentive? Why do we want to go the preventive way? Well, there's a lot of resources to be saved. We often say invest in development. You'll save the billions that we put into war. It seems like a no-brainer that we would do that. But I think until we get a little bit more gender parity, the men will continue to go to war and the women will continue to suffer. And it's not gender parity for numbers. It's because what we bring into a room is a whole of society. What we bring into a room is a sense that everything that matters in terms of your human dignity and your rights is what is on the table. And besides, there is no bird that flies with half a wing, and we are 50% of the population in this world. So it makes it an imperative to have an investment in that parity that we talk about the equality between men and women. Because at the end of the day, there ain't no one that is not a human being. And by the way, which man is not born of a woman? Yeah? And so comes the question here of youth, inclusion, civic participation, what your role is. I had a really, strong democracies. That's what we all want. I think philosophically everyone will agree there's not much to disagree with when you talk about democracy. But perhaps what we have to really think about is the model. Does the model fit the country? Do we just have a cookie cutter that says for every country, no matter what stage of development, this is the model that you put? This is a question for you that are going to figure out your constitution, if there is to be an amendment, if in fact the structures that stand today are fit for purpose, the three arms of government, do they actually deliver on what they're supposed to do? And can you blame the people in them if they're cast in a structure that doesn't work? I think it's important for us to know that democracy is a good thing, but the model itself needs to be fine-tuned. For us, this is where young people must get involved. There's no use throwing any stones at whatever institution of government unless you are going to be willing to get into that government and do something about it. And it might take you a lifetime, by the way, because I've certainly been working around in government for 35 years, and sometimes I wonder what difference I ever made, because there's so much more to do. But it does require people to make the sacrifice. It does require for us not to give up on what could be tomorrow, because if enough of us are pushing in the right direction, then there will be a difference that we can make. And I say this because beyond the ceasefire is maintaining it, beyond maintaining it is making peace, is building strong institutions, societies to make that happen. This country, well, in my own humble opinion, is the best country on God's earth. Every time I'm sitting at the 38th floor of the building of the United Nations, I thank God for being born a Nigerian. And that's because I'm sitting on 193 countries, so I do know the problems that they do have. Every single day I'm asked to talk about a country that, when I went to school, was not even on the map. It's created thereafter. And if I see the kind of issues that they have, gosh, I just think, imagine if that was my country. Now, I'm not saying we don't have problems. We have problems. There's no two ways about that. But if you're not going to look for the solutions, and if you're not going to look for how you are going to put your shoulder to the wheel to build this nation, I don't know who's going to do it for you. Here, you're a first-class citizen. Anywhere else, you're second. I don't care how many passports you have. That's what it is. And for a while, we all thought that, only the North or the Southwest could become president. But there was a president from the South-South. And that, I think, should give us hope, that there was one that was elected in this country. And we can talk about whether the election was right or was not right. It's a work in progress, the democracy in this country. But it did happen. And we did have peaceful transitions. We did lose one life is too many. But there is a lot to be said for what happens in this country in terms of where we are today. And so when you look at what is around you, count what is in the glass. And then strive to fill it. And there's no one that is going to do that except you. No one. No one's coming outside to do it, by the way. I mean, the United Nations, I'm standing here representing the United Nations. They're not coming to fix the country for you. That's your job. What they are doing is they will support you. They will amplify your messages. They will bring in what needs to be brought in by convening. If there are issues and challenges in the region for which you have no responsibility for, we will highlight them. We will convene for them. We will do that for development, and we'll do that for everything else. We'll ensure that we create civic space. We ensure that more young people come into the space where perhaps government alone cannot call you. But if you convene it together with the UN, then everyone can come. Because, by the way, the UN doesn't belong in New York to some vague entity. You're one of the owners. Nigeria is one of the owners of the United Nations. The strongest voice in the United Nations are the member states. The strongest bloc in the United Nations is the African group. There's no stronger bloc than that. And so it really, for me, talking to you today is, one, to help you to shape policy, to shape what happens in your institutions as you leave this place, or even as you are here and you engage with others that are fortunate enough to address you, so that we can actually ask ourselves, why is it that we're the marketplace for conflict? That every agency that there is in the world, the business is in Africa for conflict. Something is wrong. We're not warmongers by birth. Terrorists are not born. They're created. I mean, I went to school in Borno. I'm not a terrorist. So, I mean, people need to understand that there's a set of circumstances in a country that doesn't give justice, that doesn't give the rights of the people, that somehow, when that doesn't happen, then there's a perfect storm for those who feel disenchanted, those who feel disillusioned, and those who are easy pickings for those who want to create instability. So root causes really matter. And this is where I think that you step in. And so the challenge for you, I think, I've had enough challenges, and I have 6 incredible children who remind me every day, because they're much like you, and to you and to the dean. I think, you know, the faculty and those that teach here, there's a huge responsibility. So individually and collectively, is really to ask what it is that you think that you can lay out as you walk through the rest of your studies here, you go out into the wide world, how you will engage. It would be really good in a year's time to come back here and ask that from this lecture, did it go through one ear and out the other because it didn't make much sense, wasn't useful to you? Or was it useful to a few that actually decided to take up the gauntlet and do what I did, which is not give up on my space or on the people who are less privileged than I am, because the more peaceful we are, the more equal we are, the more chance we have of growing together. We're 214 million now, and we're going to be a lot more millions. We're going to be number 3 in the world by 2050, behind China and India. That's going to be either for our good or not so good. The marketplace for us is huge. There is no, you know, nationality like a Nigerian that works as hard as we do, that crosses borders. People like Nigerians to speak because they know we have courage. When we open our mouths, something sensible comes out. So we are leaders in Africa. But, you know, we're throwing it away. We're throwing it away. We're not as loud as we used to be. We have small countries who come to us today to ask, what can we do for Nigeria? Yes, Honorable Minister, sadly. That's a responsibility for us to turn around and say, no. This is not possible. Can't have this cohort of people in Baze and say that you're not equal to anyone on this continent or better, because you are. So what do you do about it? And you know, you're so connected. So what are you going to say that is good about this country? In this room, how many people think there's more good than there is bad? You say it's good that the women are waving. So most of you think there's more bad than there is good in this country? Wow, very sad. Really sad. Because it's an elite view. It's an elite view. Next time, really travel by road. Most of you say you're afraid to travel by road, right? Who's not afraid to travel by road in Nigeria today? You know, it's... Okay, so what do you say to all those people who have been traveling? I mean, look, I know I'm a privileged person, and I decided to take the train when I came in February from Abuja to Kaduna, because I wanted to see if what the Minister of Transport was saying was true. The train works, and it doesn't stop because there's a cow crossing the train, the rail. But it was, I mean, it was a train, it functioned. I got to where I was going to. Nobody stopped me on the road, including the cows. And then I decided to travel by road from Kaduna to Gombe. That's where I come from. And it's not that I had an entourage, because I was afraid of the entourage. I thought if I take all that wayo, everybody will know I'm on the road, so they come after me. So I didn't. I traveled with my car, and off I went to Gombe, through Kachia, through Vom, Jos, Bauchi, Gombe. And what I saw there was much more peaceful than the image that you're giving of this country. I saw farms where there were cows that were putting their manure there, and the farmers were using the manure. And I can tell you where that was. I took so many pictures. So please, 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 it is not more bad than good. Because if you will your country that way, that's the way it will go. even if it's not so good. You need to will it to succeed because the success of this country is yours. If you will it to fail, we will have conflict after conflict after conflict. And in this country, too few are in school. That's why I say you're elite. Do you know how many people are in university? Jamila Sawar will tell you that it's too little, too few. The demand for university is not even filled by 80%. It's less than 20% actually that fill our university demand. So you're elite. And so if you're telling the rest of the country that this place is more bad than good, so my challenge to you is really to look at it, and if you say it's worse than it is good, it'd be good for you to write that down. Good for you to write it down. And sometimes, don't compare yourself to Ghana, please. That's comparing apples and oranges. Compare yourself to a country with the equal population who had its independence at the same time and had exactly what. Compare yourself to Indonesia. Because Indonesia has terrorism. Indonesia took our palm oil, it's true, and so did Malaysia. Look at their indices. And that's just what I would like to challenge you with, is that if you really think it's worse than it is good, then how are you going to turn it around? Because I can assure you the world is not ready to take 214 million Nigerians anyway. This is what we've got to salvage. And there's nothing that we don't have in this country that has value and that can make it even greater. Each state, and there's 36 states in this hall, I'm pretty sure. So my state is number one right now in best business, doing business in Nigeria. Gombe is number one. Of course, it's the best state. But it's the best state for doing business. And it wasn't like that 5 years ago. How do you make states like Gombe, Ekiti, Zamfara, how do you make them the Abuja and the Lagos of Nigeria? If you had 36 states that look like the best of Nigeria, what would make Nigeria? Stand up and be counted. But this is all to say that if we keep going in this trajectory, there won't be any ceasefire that will save us. Because I'm going back again to what you need to put in place for prevention. It's not the legal instruments. We have plenty for ceasefire, plenty of tools. But what we really need is the prevention. And the prevention has to go back to strong institutions, has to go back to the rule of law, has to go back to the way and manner in which we deal with education and the mindsets that come out of institutions like this. Because if your mindset is all about how we're in demise, it's the way we will go, because you will be the leaders, not just tomorrow, many of you now, because you have voice. You have voice on Twitter, maybe not today, but you have voice. But you do have voice. You do have voice. You have a social platform. And if all you project is how bad you are, ain't nobody going to come to Nigeria. So even though I know there's a problem, and I won't go so readily by road from Kaduna to Abuja, but I did go from Kaduna to Gombe, because there are just certain parts of the country that are really no good, but there are most of it is. And that's what we have to believe in. That's what we have to believe in. So question and answer segment is planned, and I really look forward to that because I'm much better at answering questions than I am of giving lectures. I'm not a dean or a lecturer. But let's just make sure that my commitment is to try an intergenerational transition. I would like to think that I can move to one side. Behind you, there's nothing that you can do to beat my lived experience. Not now. You can do it academically, far better than most of your ever would be. Lived experience, plus what you take in education, your sky's the limit. For us, for Nigeria, as we move forward, it's the intergenerational transition that I would like us to and to contribute to. Thank you.
Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you very much. Stronger institution, stronger institution. We thank you very much for that insightful lecture. We'll go straight into the question and answer segment. Mrs. Stella Young. Okay.
I'm sure that Ms. Mohammed would think I would say, Your Excellencies, all protocols observed. when you get to the university, there are no protocols of observation. It's just the intimidation of your teachers. And you will see it now, Ms. Mohammed. Why I say you will see it that when I spoke to you, I said we are only 6 in the class. That 6 has been multiplied by the university into nearly 3 to 4 to 500 persons. Can I see the 6 persons standing? Because we'll get the marks, just the marks. The other people will just leave. The other people will just leave. So when I called you, it was for these 6 persons. And then I went home. When I came back the next day, I was summoned before the dean and told that, move your hand, you were no longer involved. So here we are as a student. And therefore, it was not my making, it was the authority of the school. If I say no, they will tell you that the degree is in character. And then, so you may have all the A's and you will live without a degree. I thank you and I listen to you very well, especially the first segment. Those of you who do IHL, the first segment was purely for IHL on the issue of proportionality, necessity, especially the causation of war and the reason for international humanitarian law. And I listened to that very well. So we'll be glad to have a copy of what you just delivered. Maybe we will make copies for ourselves because we know the university will take it from us again by the authority of the university. I'd like to find out from you, and I ask as a student, don't mind the ministerial title. I'd like to ask, where can we find information regarding the Security Council's activities in connection with the situations in specific countries or specific events? That's the question I'd like to ask.
We'll just take all the questions together. Yes.
Thank you very much, ma'am. It was nice listening to you. Nice to see you again. Well, for those of us in IHL, we can relate well with what you mean by non-international armed conflicts. And currently, Nigeria has been on with Boko Haram, and that has not seemed to have abated, giving us signs of stopping soon. I'd like to find out from you, ma'am, what are the measures that the United Nations is taking to help us maintain peace and security in Nigeria, especially with regards to the Chapter 7 mandate of the United Nations Charter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Remember, Dr. Bridget taught me protocol. The optional protocol that the members of the state that want to be part of that particular right, they come together and they sign, which you also mentioned the Child Rights Act. I noticed some of these rights that they don't go to school. They are always around, especially we have some of them in Lagos State, and they also have them in the north too. What is the UN trying to do to make sure they send those children back to school? Then another question that I have has to do with this. Okay, you said the men will continue to wage war while women will suffer definitely. Now there's another thing that is going on in the country now. We call the man Ogbo. I can't remember. Sunday Ogbo, who is trying to wage war. And I remember the 1967 war. Actually, I was small, but my mother told me about the war. Nobody will pray for such war to happen again. But what Sunday Igboho is doing is something of that nature
that is trying to bring up. What is the United Nations doing to make sure to eradicate such thing? Thank you.
Good afternoon. The question I want to ask is, how does the Security Council determine the existence of any threats to peace, ritual peace, or act of aggression? Does the issues of banditry in Nigeria fall under these categories? And if so, what has the UN done to monitor the situation and stop the act of aggression?
How are you, ma'am? First, I would like to honestly commend you. The last person talked about one very important comment you made here, which I think we should go home with, is that you said, in preventive action, why when men go to war and women suffer? But the question I thought you should have asked, why do men go to war? Men go to war to protect the women and the children who suffer at the end of the day. However, having said that, I would like to ask you, ma'am, for all the good work you're doing, and let's look beyond Nigeria. Let's look at Africa as a whole. In terms of the ceasefire agreement, can you tell us, throw some light on some of the UN involvement with conflict between Ethiopian government? Just I've talked about Boko Haram. Let's look at Ethiopia. Ethiopian government and the northern Tigray region. The conflict breeding between the northern part of Chad over access to gold reserve, and the southern Mozambique, the peace deal, and the continued conflict in the northern Cabo Delgado province. These are areas that have similar problems with Nigeria. Can you throw some light on some of the things UN is doing on ceasefire there? Thank you.
Do I have to start? Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. My question goes like this. We all know the burning issue in this country, more especially in the northern part of Nigeria, the bandits and the kidnapping. How does the ceasefire agreement going to assist in reducing or eliminating the bandits and the kidnapping? Thank you very much.
Ma, you are welcome, ma. I am Colonel Daniel, the Chief Security Officer of Baze University. I have a question. A question and a request. Request first. Nigeria, great people, great nation, great people. We have all it takes. She has told us, our mommy has told us, that we can fix this country. The UN will not come to fix Nigeria for us. We are the ones to fix. On that premise, ma, I want to request. I want to also remind us that the UN is here in this hall. For that reason, I want us to indigenize our mother, our auntie, our grandmother, an epitome of motherhood. And so, the request, to indigenize and Baze University name for this our mother. I've been seeing her on the television. It's a privilege for me to see her face to face. So I want somebody, a man and a woman, to just stand up and suggest a name that we'll give to for visitors here in Baze University. That is one. That's second question. That's the request. The question now is, ma'am, what is the United Nations doing in order to ensure that ceasefire by both parties are respected? They are giving patent in order that the parties in conflict will respect the ceasefire. That is the question. Then quickly, one person, please, to a man.
We'll do that after.
No, excuse me. Indigenization. Please, I want us to call our mommy. Mommy is English. In local parlance of Nigerians, Mama United Nation. What did I say?
Yes, my name is Deji. My question is simple. Why does the United Nations keep quiet when fundamental human rights are being violated? That's number one. Number two, right in this, because when you were speaking, you were painting this lovely picture that Nigeria. So when you were speaking, you were painting this beautiful picture. Nigeria is wonderful, it's this, it's that. Right in this Abuja, at the Unity Fountain, the civic space of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, this government, this regime, has barricaded the place. People are not allowed to protest. But when pro-government protesters are in that place, they provide police protection. Just on June 12th, we are attacked here in Abuja by security agencies. So if the UN, and especially many of my friends at the African office in Dakar, they keep quiet, they allow people's rights to be violated. Shiites were killed in this country. IPOB members were killed in this country. All you do is you wait for crisis to start before you intervene. Why don't you take steps to prevent what will lead to crisis? That's my question. Thank you.
I should stop so that I'll take more. Let me tell you for two. No, hold on. Another question.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the last questionnaire, because what you did was ask a question that everybody wants to ask, but many are being polite, right? So, I mean, you answered my question very well in the beginning when I asked you whether you thought it was worse in this country than it was good. And you said it's worse, and I told you you're an elite voice for that, because I don't think you really live the country. Now, let me talk as a Nigerian, not as the UN. If you do, then you need to go back and really find out what is happening in your villages, and what contribution there has been, where we were in 1960 and where we are today. I agree with you that the potential for this country has not been met, and we could have done much, much better. Much, much better. With this government, with the past government, with the government before. What I'm disagreeing with is that I go on a rampage of saying that there is no hope, and condemn and condemn and condemn until me, myself, I'll be condemned. What I'm trying to say is that what are you going to do? I mean, your voice right now is, the UN does not have any voice on human rights. It's not true. There has been spokesman's statements. There's been the Human Rights Commissioner's statements on human rights in this country. There was a meeting 3 days ago in Geneva about this country and a lack of access and human rights. So when you want to say nothing is happening, please define what you mean by nothing. It's not, look, with every right comes an obligation to tell the truth. And the truth in many cases comes in different colors depending who is telling it. And you need to try to be faithful to that, because when you say a mistruth, it has impact on people's lives. Whether you like it or not, some people take you people seriously. You're educated, you come from Baze University, you go out there and you say something that is an incomplete truth, and you raise sentiment. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. We were all young once, and we all want to fight for rights. But you really need to understand what the implications are, and you need to be sure of what you are saying. What does the United Nations do about hate speech? We found that with this technology comes an awful lot of hate speech. We don't have norms and standards for the digital world, and we will work on that because we need them. The minute we said we wanted to put norms and standards, we have 193 countries that must agree in consensus. This room cannot do consensus on the comment that just came out now. So it's difficult, but it's necessary, because if we don't have norms and standards, it means everyone can run riot and can say what they want, how they like, when they want, regardless of what comes out of it. So you want to talk about rights? There are obligations. And ask about how you have filled those obligations before you start shouting about the rights. And I'm not saying your rights should not be defended. We stand up for rights. We have a charter on human rights. I told you, go to your constitution and talk about the Bill of Rights in your country first. If we can't speak like this in a university like this, then we're going nowhere. And this is why I think it's, I want to hear more questions like that. Don't make polite questions for me because I'm excellency. I'm not excellency. In fact, we don't call each other excellency in the United Nations. But it is important to know that what you say has implications, and those implications could do harm. And I'll continue to say, I'm not saying that this government is a saint, it's very far from it. But there are things that we can do to make it better, and that's the challenge I'm throwing to you. You don't want to build this nation? I don't know where else you want to go. Where else do you want to go? If I had a choice, I'll come back. Actually don't, because most people say to me, no, you can't say no. Why not? Well, because this thing is beyond you. You're no longer Amina Mohammed. You're a Nigerian who is now representing Nigeria at the top of the world. I would like to come back because I know my house is on fire, and there are things that I can do about it. When I stand outside and I hear what you have to say about this country that I know that I can die for as one, then I'm really sad, because you're young. You have education. You have tools. You have a huge future ahead of you, and you're condemning yourself before you started on that journey. So please don't do that. Please don't. You can shout. It's good to shout. It's, you get your lungs moving. And I always say that you need to. Don't be quiet, because if you're quiet, you're no longer independent. Your voice is no longer clear. The truth, your truth, is not being told. So let's try to see how we fix it. I keep telling you, we can fix this together, but maybe you don't believe me just yet. You asked about the measures. Look, the measures, first of all, Chapter 7, which in the United Nations is where the Security Council takes a decision when it is brought before it that a country is in contravention of the Charter. In contravention of the Charter means they are waging war on another state or within a community they think is sufficiently bad enough that it contravenes the Charter. Chapter 7 will be invoked. What happens then is that we put a mission. The mission goes in to try to make sure that there is peace and to protect civilians. We don't have so many of those countries anymore, thank goodness. There are still some there, but not many. What we do have is political missions, and they abound. And those political missions are to really try to make the peace. And again, it goes to the Security Council. Is there a conflict that is about to happen? And you said you wait until crisis happens before you come. Well, a lot of the time, what people don't know is how much goes into preventing the crisis for how long before it eventually happens. And at the end of the day, there's only so much the UN can do in a country. It's a sovereign country. It's sovereign. You can't just walk into a country and do what you want to do. And in many cases in the past, this happened. But as we have got stronger as African nations, as Asia-Pacific has got stronger, there has been pushback against that, because you are sovereign nations with a democracy, and whether the democracy is a work in progress or not, you still need for the Security Council to give a resolution that allows you have a political mission. And the political missions are different. They do put in place what it is that I spoke about on prevention. I was asked about child rights, the Child Rights Act, and you know, what we're doing about that. Well, the Child Rights Act has been, you know, around a very long time. A lot of our challenges are that, you know, you have representation in the United Nations. It comes from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They sit there, they negotiate, there's a team. In the UN, there are different levels of capacity, and we have to acknowledge that because some countries are far more developed than others. I personally say that inequality in the UN starts on the floor of the General Assembly when a country has 3 people who have been sent from capital and another one has 300. And those 3 people have nobody to answer them when they're calling home. 300 have another 1,000 at home. So when they come to the floor to discuss these resolutions and we get those agreements, it's pretty unequal these days. But we still all have a voice. When the Child Rights Act came here, it has to be domesticated. Doesn't mean it has to be swallowed hoo-ha. It must be domesticated. And each part of the country have different cultural practices, religious practices, levels of education of which you domesticate a law in order to try to protect children. A law is not going to stop children going to the street. It's a government from the local level all the way up that provides an enabling environment for a family, first and foremost, to be able to feed the children that they put on God's earth. So poverty has a lot to do with it. Access to opportunity has a lot to do with it. Before a child goes onto the street, and I can just say that as a mother, it must be a pretty desperate time for those parents. They must think there's no other option. And many parents have told us that before they send a child as al-Majri to an Islamic school, it's because they think at least they will eat there. Because in the house that they are in, they're not even doing 010. It's 000 and wherever they can get. So there are root causes to what we're finding in our country. And some of it has got to do with education. But education still can't be had on an empty stomach. So basic social protection floors, basic availability to help a poor family get up on its feet and to keep that family together is really important. The Child Rights Act goes a long way for creating an enabling environment, doesn't do it for you. You still have to have a government that is ready to invest in that. And when we say government, let's talk about this federation. There is a reason why there's a thing called local government. And why the Constitution says the responsibilities for basic education, basic health, they're all there. And appropriations are there. So it's not that there is no resources. Maybe there's not enough. Maybe there is enough, and perhaps what has happened to the resources is a big question mark. But we need to find a way of building from the foundation up. To keep pointing at the top is not going to help anybody. If the United Nations is going to just fix itself because the Secretary General says so, no. Because he's the Secretary General of a number of entities that have boards, that have governing councils, that have laws. So all he can do is try to lead and lead in a direction that they can follow. So in a country like this, especially on education and health, the basic services, we need to start talking to our leaders at the local level who have been given that responsibility. We have 774 local government chairmen. We have 36 governors and the minister and FCT. Exactly what are they doing to make sure there's not a child on the street? And if there is a collaboration that you can do with the UN, absolutely. There are many children we keep off the street. UNICEF is part of that work that has been happening in the humanitarian field. So is UNHCR, so is WFP. Yesterday, donors gave us $31 million again for the children and for the humanitarian crisis in the Northeast. So it's not short of the international community supporting. It's not enough. And what's the best way to ensure that it's enough? First, let's just stop those hostilities. And that brings us to the question somebody asked me about the criminal activity. There is a very gray area between the insurgency and the criminal activity that we're seeing. When we saw terrorists working in this country, we knew exactly what we were talking about. Today, we have criminal activity of banditry, of kidnapping. This is not the same as the insurgency. These are two different kinds of illegal activities, of criminality. And they have to be addressed differently. And the blurred line is that we're trying to mix the two together. And we need to find ways of not doing that to address them. Now, in the UN, we have interfaces with the security apparatus in this country, and we speak to the insurgency. The Office of Counterterrorism works. We have huge programs, the reintegration of Boko Haram has been on for many years. There are hundreds, maybe there are even thousands in Boko Haram that have been reintegrated. They're not bandits, they're just like you and me. Some of them are going to school. But for those that we could reintegrate, just like we did the militants in the Niger Delta, there is hope. And that does happen, and that is with the UN support. We do things like that to try to take people and give them reason and hope to come back from where they are right now. So I think that there is a migration of an insurgency where insurgency, the backbone of it is broken, and then what you have are many people looking for other places to go, and you have people who are ready to fuel that, and you will have banditry, you will have kidnapping, and that's what the security apparatus of this country has to address. And is it doing it well enough right now? Absolutely not, because the insurgency and the criminality in the country is at an all-time high for what we have seen in the last few years. But this is the same that we see in many parts of West Africa. The increase in this. We're right now very worried about what is happening in Libya. Libya, we can say, hallelujah, ceasefire, they're moving to peace process, elections, and so Libya is on the road back to where it should have been many years ago. But all the insurgents, all the people in armed conflict there are coming south, looking for new pastures. And that's the biggest crisis that we have now, because from there, through Chad, through, northeast Nigeria, through Niger, it will come down. And then it will join what we have in the sea now, which is probably also the highest rate of piracy around the world. So we do have a lot of issues, and the international community does have to come to help us with intelligence, to help us with support in terms of the hardware that we need to fight this, the intelligence and the hardware we need to fight it. Again, we also need to have a strategy of how we're going to do that internally. I was asked questions about Ethiopia and Tigray. Ethiopia and Tigray, of course, everybody knows that it was not long ago that the Prime Minister of that country got the Nobel Prize for Peace. And at that time, he did things that no one else had done. For years, there had been protracted crisis across the borders, and he reached out to everyone, and he was able to bring them to the table. But it was an internal crisis that brought them to where they are today. Not even one of the regions which he was making peace, although there is a neighbor that is invited. And we have to make sure we know that. They're going to elections this week. Will those elections be fair? Well, what the UN does, and including observers from the AU, is to follow the direction of the African Union. And the African Union has its states have their priorities, they come together to try to resolve the problem of Ethiopia. Ethiopia's problem with Tigray, we, for the best part, asked for the ceasefire. We asked for access, because the humanitarian access is incredibly important for us. There are atrocities that have happened in Tigray, human rights atrocities for which we've spoken about, and for which now, after much negotiation, we have NGOs and we have the United Nations who are documenting and who will take this forth, because that's what you have to do. This has to come to a court of justice eventually. But it's zero tolerance for what we have seen, gender-based violence, the atrocities in Tigray. We hope that the elections will go well. We hope that the Prime Minister will, as we talk with him every week, will come back to find a way to reconcile a part or parts of his country that right now are in disarray. Again, we continue to negotiate, and that's what diplomacy is about, both as it's done in the back channels and otherwise. Chad over 2 years now in the north, where there has been these resources, they have been in the hands of some insurgents. Government has tried to reach out to try to resolve that, but it will be part of what is, we hope, a peaceful transition to the next leadership in Chad. I mean, Chad lost its president in the insurgency. Now we have come back to, with the African Union, they've agreed a transition with the military. What we have to do is to accompany that transition to a free and fair election that civilians can take over and there can be a democracy in that country. Is that going to be easy? Absolutely not. But when the army took over, there were a lot of civil society, a lot of the political opposition was on the streets. Today, they're part of the government. And that's part of them trying to make the transition to those elections. Same thing in Mali. And Mali perhaps more complex because We saw recently the military rescinding and another coup taking place. So in the course of this transition, those issues around resources and resource control and the equal access to it and within a proper structured government, we hope that can be addressed. And then we talked about Mozambique. And in the case of Mozambique, again, if I look to some of the root causes of what we're seeing here in Nigeria before Boko Haram came, I think you'll find the same thing in Cabo Delgado. And there, again, I mean, there was a gentleman who stood up to talk about men and going to war. It's your first reaction. Women, look for peace before they look for war. And I think that, it's really a serious issue to consider. We've seen many people around a table where you have women as part of your mediation, you get peace far quicker than when you have men. It's different. We're wired differently. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. We just do things differently. That's the way God made us. But together, we can go further. So I'm not saying you don't protect women. I'm saying in the course of your actions when you go to war, it is we that bear the brunt. We lose the children. We're the ones that get raped. We're the ones that have no recourse. I mean, we're damaged goods for a very long time. Survivors maybe, but mostly you're going to find victims. So that's our plea. Our plea is that men and women come together and that we do this together. Look, that's the hope of the young generation. Can you all do it together? This is a room that's almost 50-50. I've just been looking to see men and women. I haven't seen this for a long time anywhere. I don't know whether you did this by, I don't know. But it's really important that if your generation doesn't do things together, I don't know which generation will. You have to put an end to what my generation failed to do, is to give women rights, to make benefit of the other half of you. So you're walking around half, and we need to walk around whole. And that's what really needs to happen. And I think that if we can do this in some of the prevention, in some of the mediation, it would be really helpful. Let me give you an example of Afghanistan. When I went to Afghanistan, the people who were demining, I mean, there are mines everywhere in Afghanistan put down by the Taliban. It was women that were demining. It wasn't the men. It was the women. And why were they doing it? They were doing it because their children would go to play and they would get blown up. They would lose a limb. They would lose their lives. So the women were going out to protect their children, and they learned to demine. And the very next week, the men were putting the mines down. So when we came for the negotiations with the Taliban, we insisted that they had women at the table so that they could explain why it is that we need peace and what the consequences of war are, that they can really feel it. It's not just about, I went to war and I won, or I protected a woman. But it is really about the consequences of it. And when we tried to bring those women to the table, a few came to the table. The Taliban at one point started to recite the Quran to show why it was they were doing what they were doing and why they should keep women oppressed and why they were, continuing the war. And as they quoted that part of the Quran, one of the women put her hand up and completed it. They only gave you the part that they wanted you to hear, not the part that gave equal rights to women. So really it's important to have us all at the table so that, again, the truth for those that it matters to be told, and we try to get this done together. So please, this generation, whether it is Ethiopia, it is Chad, it is Mozambique, they are in serious trouble. It is women bearing the brunt, and it will be women and men that make the peace. And to sustain and grow together must be men and women. And they must be given, equal rights to be at the table, to lead. In the United Nations today, if I can say we have any success, I joined the UN as a Deputy Secretary General 4.5 years ago. We had 8 women as Under Secretary Generals, which is about as high as you can go before you get to DSG. Today we have 19 African women. 19. And I really want us to clap for that because you have no idea how hard it is to color them in. It's really hard. But I also want you to take us to task. Now that we have those positions, what are we going to do with them? So if we are to prove that women are not just tokens or the other 50%, then while we're there, we've got to do something more and better than the men have done so that they know that we're equal to the task or even better. I think that that's about the last question we had. Yeah? Okay, any more?
Okay. Thank you very much for that response to the questions. Sorry, the time is really short. We'd love to take more questions, but at this point, we'll have to come to the end of the question section. Before I call the Dean, please just permit me to recognize the presence of the Dean of Medical Sciences, Professor Amina. Sorry. Okay, so quickly, we also recognize the presence of the Provost, School of Medicine. Mr. Khalifa, the Director of Central Services. We also have the representative of the MBA Chairman, Unity Bar, the Secretary, Prince Adebi. Thank you very much for coming. So quickly, please, I think it's also important. Also, the other time, the Honorable Mr. Amechi stood up to talk. He showed the students. I think we also need to recognize the lecturers too. Ms. Mariam Abdulkadri is one of their teachers. Please, can you stand up for recognition? Okay, Ms. Stella Inyang. So quickly, we have come to, I will now invite the Dean to make our, give the token we have for Her Excellency.
Ms. Mohammed, let me repeat what Miriam told us today in the class. Let me tell you what Miriam said to the class. Of course, sitting there, say you obliterate your history. The history that I taught you, whether you like it or not, I taught you in the university.
Sorry, with your kind permission, sir, I have, we just want to quickly look at, can we have the class reps stand up? Just quickly, class reps. The various class reps from all the levels. So you can see that they are almost 90% of women. So I think we're already doing something good in the Faculty of Law. So I think it's important we draw Her Excellency's attention to that. Thank you very much. So we invite the Dean of Law to make the presentation.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the and the next generation of Nigerians that are in this hall, I present to the ambassador the representative of, let me say, Africa in the United Nations. And it's something that has Baze insignia. So that the 70th or nation, when you hang it up on your table, they will say, they won't say where is Baze, they will say what is Baze. So this is an attempt to internationalize Baze University.
So once COVID is behind us, I hope that any one of you that comes to New York will come and visit. Huh? It's an open invitation. While I'm in that office, the United Nations is yours. And it's very important that you engage. It's very important that you take us to task. I like the questions that you had today. Please continue asking them of the United Nations. But it's important that if you come, visit me. Okay. And maybe you bring Dambu Nama.
One more time. Like I said, it's the dictatorship of our lecturers. Can we all please stand, Miss Amina Mohammed, a 60th happy birthday on Sunday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday to you.
Please, a round of applause. before we take the closing remarks, we also want to congratulate Her Excellency for the renewal of her tenure. Please, we want to congratulate you. So quickly we'll invite the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Mr. David Ogbonna, Esquire, to give the vote of thanks. The closing remark and vote of thanks.
Your Excellency and the Vice Chancellor, sir, I think that much has been made about the staff lecturers hijacking the event. So what I'm going to do is to invite a student to give the vote of thanks. But before I do that, I want to pass a message from the Pro-Chancellor of the university. He's kindly asked if Your Excellency can just make a quick detour to the teaching hospital that is under construction, just for 5–10 minutes. Thank you. Because he's been watching, there's a camera over here and he's been watching us from where he is. And also, on behalf of the university, congratulate you on your reappointment for a second term. 4.5 years ago when you started, it would have seemed obvious to people that didn't know who you were. But having sat here and listened to you, we have no wonder whatsoever that you were renewed. You are very remarkable. You are very intelligent. And you are... Thank you. May I invite the President of Lausanne to please give...
Good afternoon, all. Your Excellency, the Vice Chancellor of Baze University, all members of the school team. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking time to be. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for making our time to be here. Our esteemed lecturers, it is a great honor that I have you all in the faculty of All right, so the students all present today, it is a great joy that I stand before you to thank you for making our time to be here for the event. The lecturers, thank you for making our time to be here. Your Excellency, Baze University, the Faculty of Law, and the Law Student Association appreciate your presence in our midst. Once again, I would like to thank everyone for making our time to be here today. I do hope that we go home with 1 or 2 things from our guest speaker. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think the next program is photo op session, and there is a little change in the program. So the hall doesn't become too rowdy. We have secured her permission to gorgeously stand by this side, and the man will just take a shot. She will stand here, take a shot, stand here, because you see, she has given us a carte blanche, open check, to go to the United Nations. And hold on, Nigerians are watching. They can just go there and say, I'm from Baze. The question they will ask, what's the name of the Vice Chancellor? That is the passport. What's the name of the dean? They will fail. Then you can go there. And you have the picture. So she will just stand here, have that picture, we'll have it. We can produce 1,000 copies, have it in your pocket. So she will stay here, 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 and then we'll go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dean, you're showing your age. Then, because you asked me to stand there and take a picture, but normally what they do is selfies. You know, that thing called selfies.
Okay, thank you very much. No selfies for now. You can do that after. Please, yes. No selfie, please, yes. Okay, so we'll take the middle row now. Please sit down. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move to the... Okay, you have to. Yes. So we take the last row now. So I think it's better somewhere around here. Huh?